Well, the flap is all together and painted through prime, real nice. The aileron, I got all the pieces to it all cleaned up and primed. I gotta wait for the rivets to get here before I can put it back together. Both of these wings have a little bit of fabric damage to them that need to be repaired. Got some pecker holes on the end of this wing. This is the right wing. There might be some over on the left wing too. So the first thing I started with was here in this false spar, in this flap bay here. This right wing had a little bit of blistering and stuff on it, and the left wing has some too. It's a little worse on the left wing than here on the right wing. I thought this stuff was from fuel leaking, overfilling the fuel tanks and stuff, and fuel running down in there and kind of setting in that false spar there where it would collect. But once I got to sanding that down, I could see that's not the case. There's a whole bunch of metal shavings in there inside that wing, and of course over the time of flying they vibrated down and found their way in between the fabric and that false spar. They're real sharp metal shavings and they're cutting their way through it. Well, I don't know why there'd be metal shavings in that wing after it was covered, but there were. So I've got this section here on this false spar. I've got it all sanded down and ready to go. I'll have to wash it down with some fresh water because I'm using soapy water to lubricate that sandpaper, but I've got it pretty much sanded down to the poly spray and the poly brush. I'll wipe it down with some MEK and get it finished cleaned up, and then I can put a patch on that. I'll get the wingtip worked up. There's a couple of pecker holes on the end of the wing here. I'll get those sanded down, and then we'll work on the left wing and get it ready for patching. I'm getting these pecker holes prepped up to put patches on. This one here won't need a patch because there's no hole in it. Well, maybe there is a hole in it. Yeah, there's a little hole in it, so that will need a patch. I thought that was just ringworm, but it's a hole there. This one's a pretty good hole. There's a little patch over there where it was broke loose. Now this one I just sanded down to the poly brush. Now this one here was chipped around it, and I was actually able to get my pocket knife in underneath the chips and peel everything off back. What you shouldn't have been able to do is this poly brush, when you put the first coat of poly brush on there, it's supposed to go on and penetrate the weave of this fabric and dry on the underside of it and encapsulate the weave of this fabric so that every successive layer then is all bonded together and everything is all uniform and all bonded right through that fabric. But that stuff peeled off of there. You see now you can't even see any pink in that fabric there. Oh, it should have penetrated that, and that should be pink. Anyway, I got this cleaned up. I wasn't going to feather this out, as I'm just going to do patches on here. I've got a whole bunch of patches on here. They don't blend in very well, so I'm not really worried about blending these in. Ideally, I could feather these out, put a patch on there, and blend that all in, and you wouldn't hardly even know anything was there. But there's so many patches on here now, and none of them are blended in like that. They're just patches, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that with these. I'm going to put patches on here and get them all done and coat them over and make them structurally sound. This airplane sits down on the dock through the summertime and the fall, and there's a lot of birds down there. Most of the summer they don't bother it too much. Most of the time they're busy feeding on the gurry and stuff that comes out of the fish canneries. But when they start getting in the later part of the summer and early fall, the canneries are shutting down, and those seagulls come in and start roosting on all the docks and stuff, and in particular the seaplane floats, because there's not much activity on them. And then that time of the year the crows start migrating and they start forming up in their big flocks, or murders as they call them. And then they start coming in, and I think two things happen. One, the seagulls get up there on these wings and crap on the wings, and then the crows come in and peck their crap, get any food value out of what the seagulls have crapped out. And then they start drumming on this, and they like the feeling and the sound of it, so just for recreation they start pecking on those. First 3 years I had the airplane down there, they didn't bother this airplane at all, but they've started hitting it a lot more regularly now. I've rigged up some wires on poles that I put up over the airplane that kind of keep the birds away from it when it comes to the fall. The sanding is done on this left wing now and prepped for the fabric repairs. This section on this false spar in this flap bay, in a way, is not as bad as that on the right wing. The damage there was obviously caused by some kind of a solvent, probably gasoline, soaking in there and causing the paint to blister there on that. And it probably could have been repaired by just sanding it down and putting some more polybrush and polyspray on there, but there was a little bit of damage caused from when I sanded it down from debris being between that false spar and the fabric like there was on the right wing, although not near as much. On the other end of the wing, on the top, there's two little spots on there. One spot was just some ringworm. It's just going to take some reducer on there and maybe a little polybrush or polyspray on there to fill that ringworm back out. And then there was one little teeny hole there that I've got sanded out, take a little patch on it. On the lower side, there's a hole there. I think that hole is what they used for support for the wing when they built the wings. There's one on the top and one on the bottom, and those were all painted up to the holes, and then they just had a patch glued on that. Well, it's just glued on the paint, so it never did hold. We've tried gluing on patches on there a couple times and it wouldn't hold, so I sanded down around that one, and we'll get a little patch on that. It'll hopefully hold a little better. I brought some polybrush down, mixed it up. I might have got it a little bit thin, but I wanted to make sure and get it to penetrate that fabric. I know that outer panel on that wing, or that outer portion of the wing, the polybrush didn't penetrate the fabric properly. Well, anyway, I put my first coat on these. It's where the patches go and stuff. Let that bond into what's there, and I'll go dig out some fabric now. I'm going to have to move a bunch of stuff around in the basement and crawl up there overhead and dig some fabric out, and my tools, scissors and stuff. Anyway, I'll go do that and get that down here. Got all the patches applied to the wings and coat a poly brush on them. So I'm going to let that cure. It's really cold. It's 39 degrees out again. Cooled way down. So it's going to take overnight for those to set up a little bit more. But anyway, I got them all on there. I didn't try too hard to make them look too pretty. These ones here on these false ribs actually look pretty good. I used some 1.5-inch tape on those, and that went pretty well. Got a lot of runs on it from the poly brush that I'll have to clean up. Not too bad. And those other ones, I didn't try too hard to make them look pretty, but I got them all to fit, and that'll be good enough. I'll get some more glue on them tomorrow. When that cures, then I'll put some poly spray on them, and I'm just going to brush it on. I'm not going to spray it on. I'm just going to brush it on these patches and get them applied here. We'll put 2 or 3 coats of poly spray on there with a brush, and then I'll be done with that. I'm going to go ahead and put the wings, get the wings ready and put them on. I'll give a chance for that stuff to all flash off before I put a finish coat over the top of them. That needs to flash off for a few days with all those coats on it before, especially in this temperature, before we put paint over the top of them. But I'm not going to hurry to paint them, but we get the patches on them and stuff. That's the main thing here. I got my first coat of poly spray on those patches. I just put it on with an acid brush. It's on pretty thick. I'll let that stuff set up for a little while and then put another coat on it. And I'll probably sand it down, smooth it out a little bit, but I'm not too worried about the aesthetics on that. There's 3 holes down there on the wing tips, 2 on the right wing and the one on the left wing here were the size of a dime or a little bigger, so that fabric was kind of sagging in there across those holes. I dug out my little hobby iron and tightened that fabric up that I used a patch over that. I was real careful and just put it on the holes itself and not around it, so it didn't shrink the whole piece of fabric, the whole patch, but it shrunk up tight in those holes. Anyway, that looks pretty good. Put another coat on there and then let it dry out pretty good and sand it down, and I think that'll be good enough. So that stuff's on there pretty thick. So anyway, I guess I'll go find something else to do for a little while. Well, I'm done fooling with those patches for a while. They all looked like they're pretty good on there. I got 2 heavy coats of poly spray. I didn't spray it on, I put it on with an acid brush. It wound up going on there pretty thick, and then I made sure and kept the brush down to the bottom of the container so it come out with lots of aluminum in it, so it's pretty thick. Well, anyway, one coat went on real thick, and then the next coat went on even thicker. Well, I've cleaned up all of the drips and drabs and stuff off of there. We're just going to go ahead and let that stuff cure up for a while. I'll probably take some 400 grit sandpaper and go over that before I paint it with the finish paint, but I'm not going to do that for a while now. I've got to paint that aileron and that flap that I repaired, and a few other parts and pieces and stuff. So rather than just mixing up a little paint for these spot repairs, I'll wait to do that till I get ready to do those. Well, now I can finish up working on these wings and get them ready to put on the fuselage.